All right, so we have our slides, we have our notes. Ileana, are you ready?
Yes.
And also just a quick reintroduction of Ileana. She is an awesome astrologer, mama who's in the group. You may have caught the interview that I did with her already in the group. If you haven't, go back and listen to that so you can get to know her better. She's a great astrologer that I've known for many years now. Started as a client, she was a student. She's now an astrologer doing this amazing work herself. So, if you are interested in going deeper with these concepts and you're just getting a taste today, we're always available for personal readings. There's also classes that Cornelia and I did in the Learning Library on my website, nurturingastrology.com. Those links are also in the description box, okay? But we're going to give us just a little taste of what this is, all right? If you are a child or you have Mercury combust in your chart, drop what house it's in the chat and drop it anyway if you're watching the replay, because we can keep the conversation going after.
Right. Yeah. For children and your adults as well.
Absolutely. We're going to be doing 2 children's charts and 2 adult charts. So we'll be doing one of our children and then also ourselves. So we've learned a lot about ourselves through this, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So here we go. The first thing we want to introduce is what combust is in astrology. Just that concept alone is any planet that's within 1 to 8 degrees of the sun. Okay, so what this is it has the qualities of that planet, whatever planet is combust the sun, that takes on part of the identity. Okay, so all planets can actually be combust the sun at any point. However, not all of them go combust as often. So this is kind of like the planetary expression can be challenged or overshadowed, delayed, maybe feeling unseen, or it also can be really effective at working behind the scenes. So whatever planet may be combust may have some great natural great gifts or talents as well, not always challenges, right? That's the one thing we will stress during this, is that not everything is a challenge when it comes to this aspect. There are some gifts and wisdom as well. So you'll see, and you may have charts when you're looking at it and you're going, okay, yeah, Mercury's combust, but I also have other planets right here that are also combust. And we'll give some examples of that as well. So the moon, Mercury, Venus, those do go combust the sun more frequently. So the moon, obviously, every month, Mercury every couple months, Venus and Mars around every 18 months or so, and then Jupiter and Saturn are once a year. Okay, so then the outer planets, which I'm sure you're curious about too, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they do combust once a year, but the outer planets, because we can't see them with the naked eye, really only bring their natural expressions to like almost like a conjunction rather than a combust. Because we can't really see them, they're not experienced the same way as combust aspects are. Ileana, do you have anything to add there just in general about combust?
Also, we want to mention that it's the same thing for midheaven, because I know a lot of people ask, well, what about if
Angles.
it's, right on the midheaven or your
Mm.
angles? And that will be the same thing, as we can't really see the midheaven. So we want to make sure that and also the north node, which people have asked about before. So those are things that are also not visible. So you won't see that combustion there when it comes to the MC or your angles or the north node.
Very, very good point.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so why don't you share about the difference between combust versus cazimi or under the beams? Because I know that's going to be a question.
Yes. So the first one we look at here is the Kazemi, and it's also known as in the heart of of the sun. It is in the same degree, the same as your combustion, but this one has to be within 16 or 17 minutes.
Mhm.
So it is a very short, it has to be very tight degree within those minutes to be considered a Kazemi. And this can be seen as a positive or elevated placement. So think about like a queen in a castle with her crown,
All right.
giving opportunities. So there's a lot of like powerful luck associated with the Kazemi. energy, and also great ease, depending on which house it is in, and also the rulers of that planet, which we will go into in the further slides to kind of give you an example of what we mean by that.
Yeah.
And then next we have our well, I'd say first the combust and then under the beams. So the
Yes.
combustion, we did kind of mention there what that represents. And that's more, as Dominique had mentioned, where you have your inner insight. So I always say that that's more like, are you walking in the woods with the sun out, or are you walking through the woods at night and you're only have the moon, which is a lot dimmer. So you're having to use a lot of that insight and intuition there when you're working with that. And
Oh, I
then your
love that.
under the beams is from 9 degrees. So it is past that combustion, and it can be seen as less intense compared to the combust. And right here is what you're seeing is that it's heading out of the combustion. So we're
Mhm.
kind of leaving away that energy. And what we see here usually is a weakened state of that planet. And again, it's not as intense as a combustion, but it's still a bit, I wouldn't say debilitated, but it may be a little bit more, it may take a little bit more effort to see those type of things associated with that planet. So if it's Mercury, which is the center here of what we're talking about, that is, your communication or your learning style and how you express yourself. So you still might see a little bit more of that restriction, but not as intense as your combustion that you'll see.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, and you might have something that's more on the edges of that combustion or either heading in toward it or out or away from it, right? That can
Right, yes.
um that can express that. Okay,
Right.
great.
So over time, you might see it, especially if it's applying, then you'll see
Mhm.
maybe a little bit more challenges as you age, or if it's separating, then you might see it become a little bit more easy, especially after the first Saturn return.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. That was something that might be a good point to make here if you're
Mhm.
thinking about transits. Like one of the reasons why we're looking at this too for our children is because they are young, so there haven't been as much progression of the planets, right? So we do know that as the planets progress, like if you have Mercury headed toward the combustion as your progressions go, as you get older, that could hit that combustion closer, move on it by transit or progression. And then you say like after sort of this or the Saturn return, that can be sometimes where you come into that really understanding it and how to navigate it, working with it more. And that we can talk about later as well. But I think that some of our more advanced astrologers would be thinking about that as well, that transits and progressions can activate these things and also enhance them either on the way in or the way out, right?
Right. Hmm.
Okay. So let's dive into the good stuff, which is what we're here to talk about today mostly, and that's the Mercury combust. So we're going to go through these characteristics and spend a little time on each one of them and sharing some insights, maybe personal experiences. And if you're resonating with any of that in the chat, drop that. If these sound like things like, oh yeah, my child does this, or they have this. I've experienced this with my child. So Eliana, let's just kind of go back and forth here and go through these and talk about the characteristics of Mercury combust and maybe give some examples. You want to kick us off?
Yeah, we can see here an overly active mind and a need for that constant mental stimulation. So this is where you may see the I'm bored a lot or wanting to always be doing something, which in the case I do experience a lot with my own child. So
Mhm.
having to always provide a lot of opportunities around the home for them to stay mentally engaged. So that's something that you may hear very often here with this is the I'm bored. So we may also see effects on communication overall, learning, and then also self-expression. And this could be that you may have a child with a speech delay, or that may just may need some speech therapies, take longer to speak. That is the case in my experience. I have seen that as a speech delay and just having trouble communicating what they mean. So having to repeat themselves a lot is something that you may see here with the combust characteristics. And this can show up as frustration and expressing or organizing their thoughts,
Yeah.
feeling like nobody is understanding them or that, we're not really to get our point across, not only to adults, for children, let's say, for example, but even to other children. So they may feel overshadowed a bit here when they're in a larger group of friends and everybody's talking, and it's almost like their voice feels a little bit lower and that they're not being heard amongst everybody else. So they
Mhm.
can tend to retreat if that is the case, in some situations where you may see that. So there's also a difficulty in processing information quickly. So this can be more having to see things repeated to them. They may take slower to really grasp things, and being able to offer opportunities to them or express it to the teacher to allow them a lot of time to kind of like get something. So if they have to repeat themselves, or offering tutoring after school to really help
Yeah.
them, but the main focus here is not to rush them. That's like one of the big things, is not to rush this type of energy, because it's already combust and it's just going to become even more exacerbated, or they may feel more intense or more stressed if they feel like they're
Yeah.
being rushed.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I didn't know if you wanted me to continue, or did you want to?
Sure. I can add some go from there. So frustration when you're unable to find your words, I can definitely relate to that. My son definitely has that as well. And
Mhm.
they can also be really intelligent, but have this like internal struggle in communicating still. So they might grasp concepts and get them, but to actually like communicate them clearly, like when the teacher wants them to show their work or to communicate, it can be really challenging and then become extra frustrating. So, learning how to help our children navigate those things, like telling the teacher, give them just an opportunity, show them once, step by step, giving them that extra time. And they can definitely feel that struggle of feeling misunderstood. When you have different
Mhm.
communication styles as your kids, and then they have Mercury combust, it can exacerbate that frustration of them not feeling that you're understanding what they're trying to say. And that's hard for us too, because we we want to understand them. So asking, can I get some more information? Like, give me an example, and just not not show or reveal our frustrations with miscommunication as well, because that can exacerbate it, I think. But
Mhm.
there's also really special intellectual skills here and wisdom. Like you were saying, there's like this ability to really tap in, to gifts and wisdom, even if the expression seems like it's like this genius thing, right? And the
Mhm.
ability to tap into your intuition and spirit because Mercury is so close to the sun, right?
Right.
So we're gonna also make a note about Mercury retrograde. I know you have Mercury retrograde. This can make it a little bit more difficult or much more internalized, as we know that Mercury retrograde planets are, or any retrograde planet is much more internalized. So it may take a little bit more time, or maybe when it goes direct by progression, things can change a little bit that way. Do you want to speak to Mercury retrograde a little bit since you have it?
Yes, and again, through progression, I know mine has gone direct through progression, but still, early on, for me, that was feeling, I mean, for like even more, mine does not combust, but it is under the beams. So
Mm,
there's a lot of that frustration and feeling like it, to me, it was mainly, and we'll talk about this when we talk about houses, but it's a lot about feeling unseen in certain areas,
yeah.
and unseen at school, or there's also that feeling like I'm not adequate enough, especially with the learning. That was big. So feeling like I need to repeat everything. And with retrograde, it was like I also couldn't, I felt like I couldn't tell the teacher, or I couldn't
Mm,
express to her. And there was like this fear, like I'm not smart enough. So I felt very held back, at least intellectually, because I wasn't keeping up with that speed of what everybody else was, and comparing
mm.
myself to where everybody else was at,
Oh
to
yeah.
where I was. So even now, I feel like I second guess myself when I speak a lot, or am I saying the right thing? And second guess myself on how I'm communicating, and having to really take my time to speak slower. Although mine is in Capricorn, so there is still that structure that Capricorn brings. But since it's retrograde, I internalize a lot, and I maybe might over strategize too much. And then when I try to say it, it doesn't come out the way it sounds in my head. That's my experience with my Mercury retrograde.
Yeah. But what's really interesting is that's now, I think, past, your Saturn return too, like
Oh, yeah.
you've mastered that. Like it's very clear you're a great teacher. You've really learned to master that. So we'll talk more about that when we get into your chart. But
Mm-hmm.
so we'll dive right in on this same track here with real parent tips and strategies. Like Ileana was already saying, give your child time to think before they respond. I know it's
Mm-hmm.
really easy for us to want to rush our children, or like, come on, what are you trying to say, like spit it out, or just having
Yeah.
this understanding, you automatically know, okay, like let me check myself because my mind may work faster, but my child needs a little bit more time.
Right. And it's also with not just to respond like verbally, but also to respond if you're asking them to do a task. So if you
Yes.
if they have chores at home, depending on their age, not rushing them to do those
Mhm.
chores and giving them time and sometimes even a break, especially if it's combust
Yes.
and retrograde and in detriment or something, be like do one task or do one chore and then take a break. And then you can finish it in a little bit. So really that time to give them time to respond, as you mentioned, verbally, but also in actions.
That's so true. And you
Mhm.
are really good at this too, giving them alternative ways to express themselves through art and journaling, because not all communication is necessarily verbal, right? That can reduce
Right.
the frustration as well. And you do this a lot with your children.
Yes, yes. And I'll be able to mention that when I show the chart of like being able to look at the chart and see where you can offer these things and what you can do. But yeah, being able to offer, especially like for children, something that they might find fun, like art or something to be able to express or draw out what they're feeling as opposed
Yeah,
to saying what they're feeling. And that has manifested for me and my child that he prefers to draw out his frustrations.
that's great. That's great. So yeah, encourage your child to pause, reflect before responding. We talked about that, not to rush them in speaking or in those activities.
Mm.
Creating a safe space where they can express themselves free of judgment. Um, this is a good one too, is just giving them a little bit of time, and time to themselves, maybe if they need it, right?
Right.
Let them know it's okay to make mistakes and guide them towards patience with themselves. I definitely resonate with this one with my son. He wants to hurry up and get things done fast because he gets it, he knows the answer, he doesn't want to have to do all the work, and he becomes really frustrated. Or if he messes something up, it's not right the first time. So the impatience level is like really strong. And I'll explain more about why that is in my son's chart too when we look at it. But
Mhm.
that's something that I've had to help him. Okay, like take a deep breath. When he was little, I taught him the flower and the candle, like smell the flower, blow out the candle. And I have this great story where I saw him doing Lego on the floor and getting really frustrated with it. And he was talking to himself and he was like, okay, slow down. And he did the whole, smell the flower, blow out the candle. And I was like, okay, nice. That one got through. But I have to remind him of it still, because he does get frustrated. So yeah, like teaching them those breathing exercises, mindfulness practices, also play therapy. You want to speak to that because we talked about it the other day to help manage those impulsivities and speech and stuff.
Oh, yeah, I have been able to, what I did personally, and I think that's great if you can offer play therapy to your child. I know that it depends on your city, whether it's there and insurance and self-pay. There's so much there, but if it is something that you're able to get or be able to offer for your child, I think it's
Mhm.
amazing, especially when you see these type of things in the chart. And there's only so much I feel like you can do as a parent that you can always benefit from outside help too.
Yes.
So for me, I was able to take the not only the combustion, I was looking at aspects, the houses, and other things in the chart, and I compiled a list for my therapist or for his therapist on what she can do based on where he might struggle
Love
and
it.
how she can help because she has all these resources as a play therapist that I may not have access to or know about. And I know that if I show her, here are some things that he might struggle with, can you incorporate that in therapy? Then she's able to do that during his sessions as well. So it's almost like I feel like I have a tag team on different angles between school, myself, and also his play therapist that he sees. And you don't need to have like any type of diagnosis. Although he does have a diagnosis of autism, so
Mm.
like the high functioning autism. However, that, at least for me, is where I knew that I need to be able to offer a lot of services for him to assist him. So I think that that's great when you're able to have that, because again, you're able to get some outside help that they may come up with great strategies,
Yeah,
because that's their forte. And I brought that to her and made a whole list of things that she can do.
that's awesome. I love that. I love that we can take this insight from our children's charts and astrology, and we can give that information to their, educators, to their therapists, to their, family members without even using the astrology, just, directly, but to help them understand what your child needs. Offering those insights to teachers about their learning style and their potential challenges can really make all the difference in the future of their futures and their education experience, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. Because she's always asking me, she's like, what does he need? Like, do you see anything you might want me to work on? So I
Right.
made her a whole list and I was like, yeah, but without the astrology. I didn't, nothing in there said
Right.
astrology. It just said, might, struggle with communication and asserting himself. And I
Mhm.
offered her a tip on what she can do to help navigate that and whatever she comes up with to help with that. So that'll be something
Yeah,
where he'll receive. He's been in it for a year and a half now. So I'm, as much as I can stay consistent with that, I'm going to provide it. If I can, I will
absolutely.
continuously throughout the years.
Absolutely. And
Mhm.
I would be doing my mentor a disservice if I didn't say also that understanding our child's temperament,
Oh yeah.
can also really help us understand what our children need in this way. Because when I realized that my child was highly distractible, and needed those breaks. Yes, it could be a component of the fact that he has Mercury combust, but at the
Mhm.
same time, it's also a big part of his temperament overall. So
Right.
understanding that and understanding his learning style, not everybody learns the same way. We know that auditory, visual learners, so understanding those things, and those can all be discovered through the astrology as well, which I love. So
Right.
me and Cornelia did those classes, and those are also available on my library anytime. So those are really additional things to go deeper on to add to Mercury combust, because we know that that's just one component.
Right.
And as we start delineating charts, you're going to see pretty quickly that you can't just look at that one thing. You're going to be looking at different places. We're going to show you next how to delineate that, and then we'll give you some examples. This is resonating with you in terms of the experiences you have with your child and they have Mercury combust, or tried any of these tips and strategies, drop it in the comments, the experiences that you relate to or resonate with, or the tips or strategies you've tried. Or if there's some here that we haven't added that you have used, please drop those in the chat. Those can be helpful to other parents as well. All right, so when you're delineating Mercury combust, we already know that Mercury combust is within 1 and 8 degrees
Mhm.
of the sun, from the sun. Now, just to make a note, they can be out of sign too, right? So if you have something at 29 degrees Cancer, and then you have, your Mercury is at like 4 Leo, like they're going to still be combust. So that would
Right.
be a different way of interpreting too, but you're still going to see what house they fall in. That could still fall in, on the cusp of a house or two houses. So there are ways to delineate that, because that may be a question. But ultimately, the first thing you'll do is look at the house that the combustion is in, because this could be the area of life that's affected, or the topics that are heightened, that come up with the challenges, or tough things to express, or where the shadow genius can be, where we talk about the benefits can be. And then also the houses that rule Mercury. So you'll look to where Gemini and Virgo, what houses those rule, because those are also areas of life where these things can manifest, whether it's issues or gifts. And then also aspects to the sun and Mercury. This is going to add to the expression, the style, maybe even add to some challenges or some positive things, right? That those aspects can support the combust rather than challenging it, right? We know that through Mercury's orbit, and it's always going to be either in the same sign as the sun or in the sign before or the sign after.
Right.
So it just depends on the distance, but those are the three possible signs that it could be in. But the closeness within 1 to 8 degrees is going to be combust. And that can still be in two different signs, but that's still combust. And would you say that the sign of the sun, since it's Mercury is combust, the sun, that the sign of the sun would be stronger?
I'm not sure really. I haven't really thought about like
It
that
just kind of dawned on
part.
me when you were
Yeah, I was
talking.
like, would it? I mean, probably
The,
yes,
yeah,
because again,
the
the
sun.
one receiving that combustion is the Mercury from the
Yes.
sun, so then it might be overpowering it some in a sense
Yeah,
that
that's what I was
sign.
going to say too. So if it is in, I would start by looking at the sun sign because that is the power source,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're also going to note too, as we get into some examples, there are a few other places you can look at the planetary ruler of Mercury. So if Mercury is in um, Pisces, then you would look to Jupiter, and we're using the traditional rulers.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we'll note if Mercury is the chart ruler, which is an important factor. And then whether it's in a dignity or not, like if, like it's in Aquarius or it's in Gemini or Virgo already, so those kinds of like dignities can actually support as well, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's kick it off with examples. All right. Do you want to start with this one? This is you or your son, rather.
Yes. So as we see here, the Mercury is combust there, 4 degrees ahead of the sun. It is in Sagittarius, so it is not really strongly placed in the sign of Sagittarius, and that's kind of where I'm starting, where I look at my delineation, is I'm looking at the sign. Is it strong? Is it may it struggle a little bit more because of the sign that it's in? We also see Saturn there is combust with the sun as well because they're both at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. So we're not really talking much about Saturn here, but I'm going to mention it because it's also combust. And as we had mentioned before in the beginning slides, other planets can also be combust, not just Mercury. And when I look at here, I'm looking at where is Mercury in the chart, or not Mercury, yes, here in the seventh, but I'm looking at the ruler. So I'll be going over to Virgo and Gemini, which Virgo rules over the fourth house, and then Gemini here in the first, which is the ascendant. And that also points to me that the chart ruler is Mercury. So that's an extra thing to put a big emphasis on or highlight, that not only is it the first house, but it is the chart ruler as well that is being aspected by the
Oh,
combustion
okay.
here. So there's a big highlight there, and what I'm looking at, how can I bring that support?
Oh
I'm
my God.
also looking at the aspects to the sun and also Mercury, and kind of like, is anything inhibiting? Is anything helping? And how can I find a good outlet with that energy? So, we have the Neptune and Pisces that's squaring the Mercury there, which might add a little bit to that confusion,
Yeah.
and having a little bit of a struggle there between reality or the thoughts, and maybe even daydreaming a little bit, a lot. But
Yeah.
really great creativity too is what we see there with Neptune. And then we have the sextile from Mars in Libra there in the fifth house, which again is connected to creativity and certain type of hobbies. And then I'm also going to be looking at the ruler there of Sagittarius, because Mercury is in Sagittarius. So then that takes me over to Jupiter, that is in the fourth house in Virgo. So when I'm looking at that, the first thing I kind of look at is, okay, Jupiter is making a trine over to the moon in Taurus in the 12th house. So I'm looking at that because I'm trying to see that connection there from Jupiter in the fourth. So I'm like, okay, there is support there because it is Jupiter. Although Jupiter is not very strong in Virgo, however, he's still the benefic here. And in this chart, the greater benefic. And then it's giving that trine over to the moon in the 12th house, which is the unseen, which kind of lets me know, because the moon is connected to mother, that
Oh my gosh.
I'm giving him that support.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
connecting that support from the unseen of the mother in the 12th to then the fourth there with Jupiter. So I
Ex-
already know that I'm behind the scenes looking at everything and
Right.
offering a lot to support him
Yep.
when it comes to this.
Yep.
So what I do is I'm looking here at, okay, we're first house of self-identity and may not be able to feel like he's seen, especially
Hmm.
when people first meet him, or that they're not able to see him for who he really is. And that may play into the whole autism thing that he has, and feeling like kind of like the odd one sometimes. At least that's the way he's expressed it to me, is
Hmm.
different in a sense. That's how he has told me that he feels is different. So I find that tying in there to the first house. And then at home, also in the home, he may feel like he not able to communicate his needs, or not able to express himself.
Hmm.
And I do see that kind of manifest there when I connect the sun, because the sun is ruling here of the third. So what I've seen particularly is that not he's not able to express himself, especially when it comes to siblings. And that may be because his siblings have a lot of Leo in their chart. As you can see, Leo there in the third. So when they speak and they're speaking all together, he tends to fall in the background. And I've noticed it because I see he gives up easily, or he gets frustrated because he's trying to talk and they easily are louder and can talk above him. So what I do is I come and I'm like, hey, everybody, I'm like, stop, he's speaking, let him speak and finish, and then you can have your turn. And I have to do that almost daily. I do this all the time because I know I see his frustration where he's like, ah, or he'll do that. And he gets frustrated because he easily gives up. He just lets them. And if I'm not there, then he could easily just become, in the background. And I think that's where you see that Jupiter there, the helping hand, where I'm making sure that he's feeling heard and seen in the home. And this is also why I also give him this play therapy, because not only am I trying to help at home, I'm also bringing in that help, outside help from a psychotherapist. And then also, when we're looking at learning and the Mercury with learning, I offer, or I try to look for a school that will allow him more time of freedom of play and movement. We did try the school system public, and this is not to bash anything. I'm just saying this is what works for my son. And it wasn't working because he was only allowed 15 minutes of recess and sometimes even shorter. And he would complain that was so big for him. And he was like, I can't play, and I always have to be sitting, and I don't like this. So I immediately pulled him out, and I thankfully found a project-based charter school in my city. And they're very based on like community. Everything is about community and doing projects that assist the community, like recycling projects and, you know, what is it called when you compost, those type of projects.
Yeah.
And they offer them 2 recesses a day for 30 minutes each. And then they also offer like culinary and woodworking class. And it's very interactive. Everything is moving, hands-on. In class, they have calm corners and peace corners, and they offer them chairs where they can swivel and move. And I think that that's great with that Mercury that always needs to be stimulated. So he gets a swivel chair where he's able to like listen to the teacher, yet can move and keep that going. And I offer him like fidgets that his teacher has approved that he can use
Oh,
while
that's great.
he's trying to pay attention and focus. And she, I was able to communicate with her, this is my son. He needs a lot of breaks. Allow him to show maybe just show one work. Because Dominique, you
Yeah.
mentioned that there's this intelligence and he's highly intelligent, but he doesn't like to show his work. He just gets it in his brain and really struggles taking the time to write it down. I think that's that boredom where, why am I doing this? This is tedious. And he wants to really just go on ahead and just give the answer, but not really explain. So we did find a balance and a compromise where I told her, allow him to show you one out of like all the 10. And she agreed that if he can just show her one, that she'll let him answer the rest of them without having to do that. So it's really important that I bring that to the teacher, because if not, it would
Hmm.
cause him to be seen as, struggling, but it's really just that it's too tedious and long, and the mind is always like moving and going,
Gotcha.
right?
Oh my gosh. Yes, that's so good. Such great detail too. So I'll give you a taste of my sun chart. So he is a Pisces sun, and Mercury is within 7 degrees. It's ahead of the sun, so it's heading out of that combust. It's like wider, but I cannot not look at the fact that he has Moon and Mars also combust. So this is playing a strong factor. I always knew this was a strong stellium. This was a lot of energy. I always called him my Uber Pisces. But when I really focus in on the Mercury combust, and I look at things like the second and the fifth house, and I reflect on his communication style when he was young, frustrations he had with feeling understood, I could or being able to verbalize, his thoughts clearly and things like that. I could look a lot to that Mercury in Pisces, but I think I get even more insight when I look to the other planets involved as well. With the moon and Mars, that Mars definitely adds to the frustration and the lack of patience with himself. And I really think that he's really smart and he does really well in school, but it's that absorption, ability to like just know things and like, but not wanting to be bothered doing all the work and all the steps, right? And
Mhm.
showing his work. He's like, I know the answer. Why do I have to do this? And why do I have to keep doing it? Especially now in middle school, there's a lot more work. So, I think that he doesn't always understand the value of his intelligence and see and believe in himself and his intelligence because of that struggle he has, that internalized struggle to communicate sometimes or feel like he's being clear, what he's
Right.
thinking. And so I think that it's taken him some time and some nurturing from me and dad to like really learn to embrace the value of the way his mind works and the unique way that his mind works and the tapping into that genius thing. He's really smart. He's in, honors classes and things like this. And he feels like, oh wow, like people really think I'm smart, So he doesn't believe that and see that in himself. So I think that over time, and support, he will start to believe that and believe in himself. It's just he is smart, but it's just in a different way that he learns.
Right.
And then creatively in the fifth house, again, like art, he was stuck 2 years of art when he was young and he did such amazing work, but he was always so self-critical of it and it wasn't perfect. He got frustrated. He didn't want to, me to put it up or, those kinds of things. So I think that also, I could see how those areas amplified the Mercury combust in situations and things like that. Also with me and my husband, like the moon, we would look at the rulers. So the ruler of Mercury is Jupiter in Aries square Pluto. So that Jupiter again is sometimes he can feel really good and confident, other times he's just like feels really um sort of disillusioned and doubtful about himself. And when we look at the rulers of the moon, which is so close to the sun, and that rules the IC and the fourth there. Home is where he gets that support. And also, even in my relationship, my husband and I've had to explain to him the differences between him and my son and how they think and how they communicate to help my husband give him time as well.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's one of the ways that it has worked to help me understand. I was always looking at that Pisces, but when I really kind of focus in on the combust, it's shown me his frustrations, and I feel like it's moving away. So that's a good thing that it was more frustrating as he's younger, and hopefully as he gets older, he becomes more understanding and accepting of the way his unique mind works and his unique gifts, his own brand of genius and intelligence. But I think that an overall arching theme of Pisces is self-belief. we believe in him, we encourage him, you know, mom and dad right there, but his journey will be to really accept that and see that for himself. And that's going to take time and experience and the support that we can give his educators as well, which I always did when he was young and still do, you know, even though he's like in honors English, the teacher asked me a little something about him and I was like, you know, he's not a, you know, he's a smart kid. He works hard. He wants to do well, you know, doesn't always love to read the way that you want him to read or as much as you want him to read. And I noticed too, when he reads certain books, he doesn't comprehend as quickly, you know, and so he can't move as fast, but they still see the gifts in him, which I think is nice. And it helps him, I think that helps him believe in himself, you know, oh wow, these people see that I can do this and that I'm smart and that I'm capable. And then he wants to sort of step up to that and honor that and be that. So
Right, and that's also the third house too. So, you
mhm.
know, the moon is ruling there in the third, which is where the IC
Yep.
is. So that's like the early learning and the communication and speech. And, you know, it's
Yes.
also in Pisces, which are both our children's have Mercury not in a strong sign.
Yes.
So it's not very happy in those sign placements. But however, the moon there is great in Pisces. So it
Yeah.
kind of gives it an extra support. And then, you know, naturally there, I feel like we kind of look at it like a point system, which where is it stronger depending on the sign that it's in. So
Yeah.
each and every one of them is got its own energy because although the moon is strong in Pisces, Mercury is not. So it's kind of like bouncing around and
Yes.
looking.
It's so true. So true.
Mhm.
So there, as you can see, like it's really hard to not just to look at that one thing, but you can get a lot out of it. And by looking at those houses and then delineating from there what other planets may be combust as your son had also Saturn, right? So what other planets are combust? What houses do those rule? And then going into the ruling planets of those signs and where they are and the aspects to the Mercuries. So you can build on it like that. But I think that you could still get a lot just by starting to look at Mercury, if it's combust, what house it's in, right? And then
Right.
those
What
rules.
house is in the ruling? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to share a little bit about yourself and then I'll do me and then we'll be done?
Yes. So this the one here most affected would be the Saturn combust there, and then Mercury is considered to be under the beams of the sun, so not combust. And again, as we mentioned, we're not going to say Neptune because Neptune is not a planet that we can see with our eyes. Same thing
Right.
with the midheaven. And it's a wider conjunction with Uranus as well. So we're not going to add in the MC, Neptune or Uranus there. So what we'll look at is the Saturn, and Saturn is there in its own home of Capricorn. So it is in astrology, they call it chariot, like the chariot card. So in tarot, so in chariot means that it's able to navigate, as you see with the tarot card, of being able to navigate and kind of like navigate it with a little bit more ease because he is in his own reigns of Capricorn. So there is a strength there. And Saturn is considered to be a inferior, I believe it was, to where it's not as affected as opposed to Mercury, the moon, or your more closer planets. So Saturn, it kind of also makes it less of an impact when it's combust because not only is he in a strong Capricorn sign, is at home, then also he is a more inferior planet, or I think it was inferior. Did we write that down in the notes,
Yes, yes.
Dominique? Okay, so then that will make me again look at the 10th house of career and also the MC because the MC is ruled by Saturn. So that can be where I have felt more like I put in a lot of work in the things that I do, but as opposed to somebody, let's say, who had more a Kazemi or something where they put in the work and then it explodes and they become viral and all this stuff. I feel like mine is a little bit more like a heavier climb to not only be recognized and seen with all that energy up here near the midheaven, it's almost like I feel like I have to put a lot of effort and sometimes feeling like I'm not getting a lot back. But the consistency of Capricorn and that cardinal energy, I'm still going. There's still a drive. There just may not be as much visibility as I would like. But I think that over with time, especially now that I've gone past the Saturn return, that now it's like, okay, now you've put in the work, you've done the responsibilities. Saturn always gives you your rewards when you put in that work. And
Yeah.
again, it's not as intense as with Mercury. So I don't feel like that's going to be the case forever. And then that also takes me towards Aquarius, which is the 11th house, because Saturn is the traditional ruler of Aquarius. And that's also with friends. And for me, has manifested, especially in childhood, where I didn't have a lot of friends and groups of girls, particularly because those were the people I wanted to be friends with, was the girls. I did not know. It was like a immediate rejection. Like everybody would have their groups, and I was always the new girl because my mom was always moving. So I always felt like nobody could see me. There was that feeling of not being seen in those groups and overlooked a lot. And I think that that's where we go in with the Mercury under the beams because that takes me to the third house
Mhm.
of siblings and neighborhood. And the same thing, like my neighborhood had a lot of kids, but everybody kind of clicked together. And I always felt like I was just left unseen and I left to my own devices to play alone, play in a little near a pond by myself. Same things with my siblings. They were allowed to have these opportunities to be seen, but I was not. So my sisters were able to do these little child modeling shows where they would be able to walk and model clothes. I don't know why I wasn't, but it was them. And I was always just like, oh my God, I wish I could be on stage and I want to model too. And I felt very left out on a lot of experiences growing up because it's almost like they had a whole different childhood than I did. So that may connect there with the unseen there when it comes to siblings and feeling really overlooked in the household. Although it's not the fourth, but between my siblings, I felt very overlooked. Like everybody, they were the popular girls. And then the daily routines of the sixth house where Virgo is and health. And to me, that's more like sometimes I got something that was very odd in my body. And even the doctor was like, well, it's benign, but I really don't know what this is. Like this is the first time I've ever seen this. It's benign, so we took care of it, but it was just something that is not really known or why. So again, thankfully it's not something that occurs a lot, but that's just kind of like how it's manifested there, where I get sometimes very odd things that come out of nowhere and leave. I'm not really sure what it is or what's going on. But since it's not combust, it's not as intense or, as hard as it could be if it were combust. And I believe that it is separating. Um, Either
Yeah.
Mercury or separate, excuse me, Saturn. So again, when we see that separating aspect, it's more of that, especially after the Saturn return, you'll see like an ease or a release of pressure from that combustion or the under the beams.
Nice. So good. It's amazing too.
Yeah.
And yeah, you've mastered that.
Yes.
And it's so great to be able to reflect on that and have that different understanding of your childhood and your upbringing and really accept that and realize your gifts now and having moved through this and understood it now from this different perspective. You feel like it frees you a little bit from that pain that
Yeah.
you had when you were young or
Yeah, because
something.
sometimes I was mainly just like, I don't understand. Like that was always my
Yeah.
keyword. I was like, I don't understand why. Like I've always asked myself why. And then when I looked at it, I was like, oh goodness. I see why, or I see why this has manifested that way. But I
Yeah.
always take everything as a lesson and learn and how can I use this to elevate my own self and my spirituality and my connection.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think that's a great simplistic way of explaining Mercury combust. It's like the great desire to understand,
Right.
and wherever that combustion is and the houses that it Mercury rules are the places where there may be a struggle to understand.
Right. To understand and some confusion, especially with the retrograde too.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of internalizing.
Yeah. Okay. So lastly, we'll just look at mine here. So Mercury is under the beams, so not combust, but definitely under the beams. It's 10 degrees and it's behind the scenes, behind the sun. So it's headed into that combustion. So definitely I felt this moving into that early childhood learning because Mercury rules the third, right? And the 12th. So I definitely struggled when I was young. I loved learning. I was a voracious learner and obsessed about learning. And but I was not the greatest student. I had to work extra hard.
Mhm.
And, Saturn at 29 Taurus, the ruler. So I loved learning and I wanted to learn, but I definitely struggled. And then I realized that the things that I were interested in, not math, that's for
Right.
sure, but those larger subjects, those mysterious subjects, those things like religion and spirituality and the occult, were always things that I was interested in very young. I also struggled when I was young and still recognize sometimes feeling smart enough, not recognizing or appreciating my own level of intelligence and always feeling like I don't know enough, which is why I was obsessed with learning. And I still am like this, obsessed with learning all the time. I'm always learning and always wanting to learn. I feel like I'll never know enough. And maybe that's the need to learn everything, right?
Right.
But it's very much part of the life path for me. And another thing we didn't mention, which I have here, is that Mercury is conjunct the North Node. And so the nodes, again, are points. They're not planets. So they play a role, but not in the same way. But it's certainly because the North Node is between this combustion for me, there is something about this being a big part of my life path, which makes
Hmm.
sense why I am a teacher of astrology. I'm an astrologer, and I have this love for the occult and also wanting to learn about things, eighth house, that also scared me, that I felt the more I learned about them, the less I would feel scared of the unknowns or the uncertainties. A Gemini ruling the 12th. So like, what is beyond this place? Why am I here? Like I found myself asking a lot of really big questions as a kid,
Hmm.
that why am I here? What is life beyond this place? And what is death? I mean, like, my mind was going to these much bigger, broader topics at a very young age. So I would go to church with different friends, and experience what they were living, and very curious about those things. But the everyday, schooling. So it had to be things that I was really interested in, that I would really take on.
Right. And for people entering now and seeing, we did mention that because the North Node is there, that doesn't mean that the North Node itself is combust. It is
Right.
not.
Right.
Although it is connecting there with Mercury, we don't want anybody to think that the North Node is also combust. It's not.
Right.
So, we can't physically
Exactly.
see the North Node in the sky. And
Exactly.
also what I find with Pisces energy, because your MC is Pisces, I always find like they're either very spiritual or religious.
Yeah.
Or like extremely religious. I mean, that's my experience with
Yeah,
the Pisces. It's always like very religious or spiritual. So, astrology and stuff like that falls under the spiritual umbrella.
absolutely. Hello, as an Aquarius, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I was fascinated by both, you know. But you can
Right.
also look to like for support the aspects of Mercury. So my Mercury, trines my sun in the fourth, it's sextile Neptune in Sag in the sixth, and then the ruler obviously is Saturn in Taurus in the 11th, but it's a very tight in conjunction to Jupiter in Sag. So I do feel like I will get super excited about ideas, a lot of things flow, and then I start to question, okay, is that going to work? Is people going to that's where my questioning will come in. And that can
Mhm.
speak to that Mercury under the beams of just like all the questions, and that analysis paralysis can sometimes get me stuck. Like that's something I'll always be working with as part of just how I'm built, you know?
Mhm.
So awesome. So that's just a little bit about that for me. So Mercury combust, we have shared here today that it's when the sun is between 1 and 8 degrees of the sun. Mercury is, all planets can be combust, except for the outer planets. We don't experience them the same way. These are some of the qualities that you can experience with that. Being so close to the sun, this can become very part of our identity and our personality, a big part of it. And expression and communication and learning styles is very much mercurial, and these things can be challenged in various ways, but can also offer gifts that we can grow and evolve into. And by understanding these about our children, then we can really help them grow and evolve into their gifts as well.
Mhm.
So support through awareness can really help overcome those in time. and also through transit and progression, as we've spoken about as well. And then you want to recap those supports for your child, maybe any closing thoughts you might have?
One closing thought before I do that is that I also wanted to mention that if Mercury is in the first house, it may be a lot stronger. So that's an extra form of support because it is in his house of joy.
Nice.
So having Mercury in the first, especially if it's in, Aquarius and it's direct, not retrograde, you
Yeah.
may have an easier time navigating that combustion. So you always want to look at where it's placed. So for the House of Joy, if it's in the first, I'd say that's something that's going to give it some support there.
Great.
And ways you can support your child with Mercury Combust is, of course, as we mentioned, allow them to slow down and have reflective conversations with them. Give them time to not only think, but also respond. You want to be able to offer creative expressions as an outlet and alternative ways to not only express themselves, but also learn. So that's if you're able to offer a different type of schooling environment for them, and also being able to offer a space for them to feel safe and express their emotions. And I already offered that example with my son who has an art table, offering him that whenever he's angry, he usually scribbles and draws out what he's upset about without having to say a word. And that's his way of getting it out. And
Yeah.
there is no shame either when he does that. Like, I don't bring the drawing to him and be like, why did you draw this? You know? So I allow him to do that. And I think that really helps that combustion energy. So you really want to encourage creative outlets if possible with any type of art supplies. You want to encourage and practice patience and mindfulness, and not only for yourself, but also teach them different ways that they can do that. So you can offer mindfulness techniques. If they like to do yoga with you or any of those type of spiritual practices, include them. There's a lot of YouTube videos on kids yoga that they can do. So I feel like kids have a lot of more access to different things now with mommy and me classes or classes separately for them to help them learn those meditative practices. So I think you just find a technique that works for them and see what they like and what they don't like. So you can definitely use resources like online or even therapy to be able to offer them different things that you might not have thought about.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So good. So good. All right. So this is us. And our information is also in the description box as well. Thank you so much for being here for our first Astro Live chat. Thank you, Liana. This was fun and I think a great first beginning chat. And hopefully everyone got a lot out of it. Thank you for all
No.
great
Oh,
expertise and wisdom.
of course. This is wonderful. And thank you for having me too to collab with you.
Of course, my pleasure.